watching and listening to Machinery Matters. With me, Lydia Turner.
And me, Matt Tilt. Machinery Matters is brought to you by Farm Contractor and Large Scale Farmer, which you can find more information about at www.farmcontractormagazine.com.
So, as some of you may know, at the beginning of May, it was in fact Deaf Awareness Week. And this is an extremely important topic for us to discuss on Machinery Matters, because so many people in the farming community are exposed to equipment which, without the correct PPE and limiting length of exposure, can be extremely damaging and dangerous.
That's why we're extremely delighted to be bringing you this special-ish episode of Machinery Matters, which is accessible via YouTube with closed captioning. So before we get into the main body of today's episode, we're going to bring you the latest agricultural machinery news.
Figures released by the Agricultural Engineers Association show that for the 6th month in a row, UK tractor registrations have increased year on year. April 2021 saw 1,009 units registered, an increase of 11.1%, bringing the total for the year so far to 4,268, 12.3% up on the same period in 2020.
And an issue that will be affecting everyone across agriculture. Nearly 70,000 people have backed the NFU's call for immediate action to tackle rural crime, demonstrating the demand for a safer, cleaner and greener countryside. As newly elected police and crime commissioners take up their posts, more than 50,000 people have signed an open letter demanding action to tackle fly tipping, including working closely with local authorities and landowners on prevention, clean-up and prosecution.
We're delighted to welcome NFU Farm Safety and Transport Advisor Tom Price. So Tom, we're well aware of the headline dangers on farms, but how dangerous can loud machinery actually be?
Well, any sort of loud machinery can pose a hazard and can result in damage to hearing, and dependent on the level of noise and the length of exposure, that damage could result in tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears. That can be uncomfortable, and it can cause difficulty with things like sleeping, all the way through to complete loss of hearing. And I think one of the things about hearing loss is that potentially it's something which it can be very gradual and can go unnoticed really until you get to the stage where there's some irreversible damage being caused. So I think yes, it can be dangerous and can have really big effects on a person's life, because if you lose your ability to hear, that affects your ability to interact with others across every aspect of your life, and specifically in a work situation. If you rely on verbal communication for instructions and especially for safety information, then that has a very practical impact as well.
And what would you say, the effects of this can be devastating. What would you say are the key culprits of hearing loss on a farm? What are the things that people are using and maybe not taking into account the damage it can do to their hearing?
Well, I suppose it can cover sort of like a whole range of sort of different types of equipment that will commonly found in sort of like farm workplace, but also I suppose you'd have them in the home workplace as well. It's just that perhaps when you're using stuff at home, you don't use it for the length of time that you would in a work situation. So I think, to give you some examples, I think that if you find yourself in situations where noise is intrusive, for example, when you're sort of beside a busy road, or if you're using a vacuum cleaner, that would be the sort of situation that would give you sort of like cause for concern and to let you start thinking that you should be doing something. Or for example, if you're trying to talk to somebody in a normal conversational tone, and you have to raise your voice when you're sort of 2 meters apart, that's the sort of situation which would make you think, well, yeah, there's a bit of a noise issue here and I need to be doing something about it. And to give you some sort of practical examples, my lawnmower, it operates at around about 90 decibels. What the law says is that when you get to 80 decibels, that's when you should be telling employees about the risks in the workplace. And when you get to 85, that's when you should be doing something about assessing the risk and taking steps to monitor that risk. So using that example of a lawnmower, which is being used at 90 decibels, then if you're using that, say, for more than half an hour, then that's the sort of situation where you should be thinking, right, we need to be looking at who's using this, how long are they using it for, and what sort of protection we need to be supplying to keep somebody's hearing at the way it should be. So
Yeah,
so it's going to be, it's like a whole range of equipment. So it could be stuff from I don't know, using an electric drill, if you're using a mower, or if you're using sort of, say, a chainsaw, or any other sort of implement which is sort of attached to the back of the vehicle. So it could be anything, and I think you really need to start trying to think about, is it intrusive in a particular situation.
Okay.
Yeah, and I mean, you touched on, a few different pieces of equipment there. And one of the things that we've seen in recent times is, the development of tractor cabs, and, a lot of people no longer having to worry about the impact of louder implements because of these. But do you think this contributes to a lot of operators forgetting about the other equipment that can cause damage?
Well, just to go back one step, perhaps, is to sort of think about modern tractor cabs. Now, typically they will have a noise level of around about 80 decibels inside the cab, but that makes some assumptions. First of all, it makes assumption that it's a relatively modern cab, and the technical spec is actually to that level. So if you're using a cab, I suppose the first thing to do is actually to dig out the manual and see what it actually says about your particular vehicle and what level of protection it gives. That's also assuming that all the stuff which has been fitted into the vehicle to keep noise at that level is actually in good nick. It hasn't been damaged in some way, and perhaps might even make some assumptions like you're keeping the window closed.
I was just about to say that we're terrible in this industry. For the first thing we do, open the back window and have maybe even lean out and break a couple of other health and safety rules in the process.
So I think what I'm trying to get to is that just because you might have a cab, which you think gives a certain level of protection, I think there's still a requirement to make sure that you sort of check that out in the particular situation that you're actually using it in. And also, I mean, there's tons of different, there's like a whole range of different implements that you can be used, and they're going to operate in different ways. And it's not necessarily that just every implement is going to be okay in that particular context that you're using it in. So I think, check the cab, see what level of protection you've got, and also make an assessment as to how it's actually being used at the time. In terms of other equipment, I think it's important just to remember those basics, that you might have protection in your cab, but in other sort of situations you've still got to have that awareness that loud persistent noises, it can be a cause for concern, and you may need to take steps to do something about it. So I think that sort of rough and ready guide is that if you need to raise your voice to have a conversation, if you're 2 meters apart, that's the point you should be thinking, and we need to be doing something about it. And I suppose also it's not just in a context of using vehicles. It might be other equipment that you use on farm, which could result in high noise levels. I'm thinking perhaps about grain dryers here. So it's that wider situation. And even some animal feeding units, they can produce noises of up to 100 decibels. So it's important to have that broad awareness.
It'd be a first time for anyone to tell me to raise my voice. I'm normally told to speak a little quieter. What sort of PPE should farmers and contractors be looking to invest in? And what would you say to people who, in the case of, say, ear protection, note that it makes it difficult for them to do their jobs because they don't feel like they can have that level of communication with their colleagues in the area?
Okay, well, I suppose the first point to make is that when you look at any sort of hazard that's going to cause a risk of harm, is the first thing to do is actually to look to see whether or not you can take that hazard away completely. So are the things that you can do to actually stop exposure to excessive noise in the first place? And that might be really simple things like, making sure the kit's serviced when it should be serviced, that the stuff which is meant to limit noise is actually there, it's fitted and it's working and it's well maintained. It could be that you could make changes to actually working procedures to take away that source of noise. If that's not possible, then there is a duty on employers and just people who are working for themselves to take steps to control and mitigate excessive noise. And one way to do that would be by ear protection. Now, what level of protection is required is going to depend on how loud the noise that you're exposed to is. So I suppose you have to make sure that you've done a sufficient assessment to actually understand the nature of the threat to start off with, and then you can get the right equipment in to combat that. And when you're looking at ear defenders or ear muffs, whatever you want to call them, one way to assess what's needed is to look at what's known as a SNR number. That's a single number reference. And in general terms, that the higher the SR number is, the higher the level of protection that ear defenders will give. So say, for example, you're operating in an environment that's 90 decibels. If you get ear defenders which have an SNR of 19, that means then that they're actually bringing that noise level down to 80 decibels. So it has an effect of reducing the level of noise exposure. I suppose one of the other things when selecting PPE is actually to select the right stuff, because there's no point buying stuff which is going to be overcompensating, and I think that comes to the point that it could lead to people feeling isolated, sort of not able to understand or take part in communications with fellow workers. So it's very much a case of assessing the situation and choosing the right kit to fit that particular situation. And I suppose also, if you are working in a situation where there is high noise exposure, is to work out it's sort of like agreed policies, agreed methods of communication. So it even could be that if you're doing a particular procedure, you don't proceed until you've had the thumbs up from whoever is working with you. But those are things which you'd have to look at in a particular work context.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot there in terms of that sort of communication in regards to accessibility as well. I don't know what the overall population is in regards to the amount of people within the farming community that actually are deaf or have hearing loss of some form. But that's a really, I know it wasn't directly linked there, but it's an interesting point to think about in terms of how would we communicate in those scenarios as well, not just the scenarios in terms of when people are wearing, ear defenders and things. And
yeah,
sort of on a separate note, a lot of these pieces of equipment that have an impact on hearing, they can also cause a lot of other problems, with the vibrations and things. And in regards to that, what other advice would the NFU or yourself personally give to prevent this?
Okay, you're quite right. Yeah, if you're using sort of handheld equipment that vibrates, I'm thinking of things like chainsaws, bush cutters, then there is a need actually to make sure that you take sufficient steps to control that. So I suppose the first thing is actually to make sure that you look at what people are doing and what the potential risks are. I think things like handheld equipment. Some sort of top tips are to make sure, first of all, that it's well maintained, that the stuff that's part of the kit, which is designed to limit things like vibration, is actually doing its job, and it's doing its job well. I think, especially when using handheld equipment, always start with warm hands and keep them warm. That helps blood circulation and can help limit damage. And I think also it's to take regular breaks. The other another potential source of vibration is something which is known as whole body vibration, which, as it says, it involves shocks to the whole of the body, and typically you'll get those when using vehicles, when driving tractors and other agricultural machines. So I suppose might just sound like common sense, but if you've got adjustments on the chair, use them and get the chair sorted out so that it's comfortable for you. Just because you're jumping into something, it might have been used by somebody else in the business. Don't be afraid to spend that couple of minutes just making those adjustments to get it back to you if there need be. I suppose the thing about maintenance is it applies as well. To make sure that everything is maintained and all the suspension features on a machine are there and doing the job that they're expected to do. Travel at an appropriate speed, for the ground that you're going over, and it sounds sensible, but it's choose the easiest route. The one which is the smoothest and the one with the least ruts in and the least things which are going to shake the vehicle and you about. So I suppose the message is really, sort of a lot of common sense can go a long way in terms of trying to control that.
Try and limit how many times you're cultivating on an angle across the field.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if you have got a bad back, if you are suffering from back problems, driving a vehicle where you know that you're going to be going over rough ground, might not be the best idea. So it's actually, thinking it's about thinking for the driver, for the person. Am I the right person to do this particular job, or I'm not feeling too good today? Should I put it off? Can I reschedule my work so that I get this at a different time? And also to take frequent breaks. Give yourself that break. It's good in terms of giving you a rest from moving around in the vehicle, but it's just a good idea anyway when it comes to working, just to have a break, to get out, stretch your legs, and most people, I'd say, would say that they go back to work feeling that little bit better, a bit more refreshed, and better able to get on with the job.
That's so interesting. I'd never considered that just having warm hands would kind of reduce the impact of using a chainsaw, using a drill, anything like that. So
yeah, I would say that there's the HSE website is a really good source of information on noise and how to manage it. And on the website, they've got a noise calculator, which can help you assess the situation that you may have in the workplace, and steps that you can take to control it, and types of PPE, earmuffs that might be appropriate for that particular job that you're doing. So it's a really good place to go and look.
And that brings up another kind of, I guess, final point really, which is if we're going to be really almost callous about this isn't just about people's health and livelihood. If you're an employer who is found to have not provided the right equipment for a certain job, you can be held liable in some regards, can't you?
Oh yes, very definitely. In basic terms, there's a duty on every employer to take all reasonable steps to protect the health and safety of people that they employ. There are also specific regulations, the noise reduction regulations, which just talk about noise in the workplace and things that employers need to do. So employers can find themselves in hot water, not just in the sense that they may have contributed towards an employee's ill health and permanent loss of hearing in some cases. They can also find themselves in difficulties with the HSE to show that they've actually discharged those basic duties to take reasonable steps to protect the health and safety of people who are working for them. And I think in terms of action and duty, it's important to remember that duty to take reasonable steps to protect health and safety, it applies to the self-employed as well. The self-employed have a duty to protect their own health and safety, and they can face enforcement action from the HSE for failure to do something which is helping to look after their own health and safety.
Yeah, no one likes a call from HSE.
No, but and I think what I would stress is that the HSE, they are the regulator. They've got a duty to uphold the law, but also they are really good source of information and advice, especially when it comes to hearing loss. There's a publication called FarmWise, which is available on their website. If you just Google HSE FarmWise, that comes up with some really useful information about a whole range of safety aspects on farm. But there is a section on noise and noise protection, and also if you just go onto the website and just put in noise, you get up loads of other information which is generic across all industries. And also, as I said earlier, there is a noise calculator which is available on their website.
And we'll definitely put those details somewhere alongside either, if you're listening on the audio or you're watching us on YouTube, you'll be able to find that somewhere. So it will definitely be there and on our social media too. So we'll make that process nice and easy for people to get hold of that information.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for taking part, Tom. Thank you for helping us raise awareness on noise levels within agriculture and the steps we can take to hopefully reduce this. So, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure to help. Thank you.
Thank you.
On an exciting note, Cereals 2021 is coming to Lincolnshire for 2 days on the 30th of June and sees a wide variety of manufacturers take part in the first agricultural event since the pandemic, with demonstrations of the latest machinery. One of those manufacturers is McCormick, and Matt was lucky enough to chat with them today.
So I'm joined by the Business Development Director of AgriArgo UK, Ben Agar. He's going to be talking to us about the new McCormick X7 624 tractor and some of the cab developments that the company have introduced over the last few years. Thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thanks, Matt. Great to see you as always.
Yeah, good to see you too. It's only been a couple of weeks since we got to meet up in Doncaster and kick a bit of dust up with the X7.
Yeah, it's been long overdue. It was great to finally get back out in the field again.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's nice to see people face to face and not just on a screen. I'm getting a bit Zoom fatigue.
I'm glad it's not just me.
So, like I said, we recently got to drive the X7 624. There'll be a full rundown of that in Farm Contractor. I've had a chance to drive it, just not a chance to write it up yet. But do you want to give our listeners a kind of brief rundown of the machine and what's been introduced with it?
Yeah, thank you. So the X7 624 is our new Stage 5 CVT transmission machine. So we have 3 models in the CVT version of the X7. The X7's been around a few years now, but this is the next generation. As we move to Stage 5 emissions, we've taken the opportunity to add a load more new features, which we really believe now puts us right in the middle of the mainstream of other manufacturers with a really good quality product with lots of new features that will hopefully continue to help grow the success of McCormick in the UK.
Okay, that's brilliant. Yeah, it's a really nice tractor to drive, and I'm still really impressed with the data screen manager, the DSM, and how easy that is to use.
I think with a lot of tractors nowadays, it's all about making the operator as efficient as possible, particularly when people are spending long hours in the tractors. So as you mentioned, our DSM has been very much redesigned with this new generation of tractors, so that we've got a lot more functionality in there. We're using icons to navigate through the screen that might be more familiar to people from a sort of mobile phone type background. It's very much almost app based within the screen, very user friendly, very straightforward to operate. And then that links into things like programmable functions within the tractor. So on the main joystick now, for example, we've got 5 programmable functions. So anything that comes off the CAN bus network of the tractor, you can actually program as a function into the joystick. So we can go from very simple button presses right the way up to complicated headland management turn sequences with timings, making it as simple or as complicated as the operator wants for the job.
Yeah, I know. Even the tractor doing the headland turn for you now, which I still occasionally, when I'm in the tractor, it still does look like. I think there's that part of you that's, you still want to take the wheel a little bit. It does take a little bit of getting used to the headland turns, doesn't it? The automatic ones.
It does indeed, and it's quite a strange feeling. We haven't got quite yet to the stage on demo where we've had to cable tie people's hands together. It is a very different sensation, and trusting that the machine is actually going to do the job for you, and just having confidence that it will perform. But once you've experienced it a few times, it's a really interesting way, and allows you to concentrate on what's happening at the back of the tractor.
Yeah, definitely. Now, when we met up in Doncaster a couple of weeks ago, you talked a little bit about the cab. You talked about how comfortable it was, the kind of reduced noise levels in the cab, and this links into what we've been discussing on the podcast. And we know that loud machinery can have an impact on your hearing. It's probably less of an issue now within tractors because we now have a cab. No one's kind of just sat on an open air seat listening to the engine roar. Argo Tractors produces its own cab, so could you talk us through a little bit of the development of these?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about working for a company that actually makes its own cab systems is that we start with a blank sheet of paper. We're not buying a cab system from somebody else and then we have to make the tractor fit the cab. We literally, when we're designing tractors, we can make the two aligned from the start.
Mm-hmm.
And we, as you say, we produce all our own cabs. We have a factory in northern Italy. And everything is done by robot, right? Obviously through from CAD, computer-aided design, right through to the welding on the line. So every cab as it's produced goes on a special jig that can rotate it through a number of axes through 360 degrees. So that rather than, for example, coming in over the top to put a weld in, you can actually flip the cab and come under the bottom or come from an angle, so that it's incredibly precise. You're not just building in the strength and inherent strength of the cab that you need to achieve the ROPS and the FOPS standards, for example, but that can also have an impact on noise.
Okay, and how is noise kind of minimized in these cabs now? I mean, we're getting down to kind of what I believe you told me, but you have to remind me, what is the decibel level in the new cabs?
So we're at sort of, depending on where you measure it and for how long you measure it, there's different numbers, but generally we'd be talking about 70, 71 dBA. So yeah. dBA is the decibel level. And just to put that into context, if you were to be listening to some rustling leaves, that has a decibel rating of 10. If you were to be having a vacuum cleaner in front of you, that has the equivalent sort of noise as you'd experience in a cab. A live rock band would be 130 decibels. A rocket launch would be 180. So that puts it very much into context. But you've got to then remember that you're working in this environment for a long period of time. So whilst I do my own cleaning at home, I never vacuum for 8 hours. So we've got to look at every point within the cab environment. But it's a really interesting one because we spend millions of euros investing into making this the most quiet and most comfortable workplace possible, and then so many operators do exactly what I do. As soon as they get in the tractor cab, what's the first thing we do? Open the back window.
Open the back window, yes.
You lose all of that protection from noise. And I think as an industry, we take health and safety very, very seriously when we're talking about operating and working at heights and slopes and PTO shafts and all that sort of stuff. But we sometimes forget that one of the, I think there was a piece in one of the journals that 75% of people working in agriculture can at some point in their career have some sort of hearing difficulty. So making the cab the most productive, but also the most safe from a noise pollution point of view is really a key thing going forward. And as we move into sort of next generations looking ahead, because we're always looking at the next generation and where we're going, there's no sort of silver bullet that will say we can bring cabs down to 60, 50, 40 decibels. Because at the end of the day, it's a workstation on top of a machine that's moving and producing noise. But I think we will be constantly striving to make sure that we make the environment as quiet and as pleasant as possible.
Okay, I mean that's really interesting because that links to a lot of the other operator comfort things, because the need to open the window is reduced or even negated by the fact that you can now have kind of climate control in your tractor. You can have all these notifications through the kind of DSM and other screens on the market if people. So you can then get a feel for the machine on the back or the machine on the front or both by using what's in the cab to the kind of utmost, can't you?
Absolutely, and again, there's a big uptake we're finding, particularly with larger arable users in wireless cameras. The kit's getting bigger. You look at a big square baler nowadays on the back. If you really want to see what's going on and what's coming off the back end, a wireless camera or Bluetooth cameras are the way forward. So again, negates the need to be looking at opening the back window and sticking your head out the back. But I guess it's the way we were all just brought up.
Yeah, definitely.
So the very first tractor I ever drove certainly didn't have a cab. So, it was dust and muck and everything else that was coming at you. So we should count ourselves very lucky of these environments we now get to work in.
Oh, I was terrible when I worked on the farm for opening the rear window. I used to sit in the cab all day and come back kind of dirtier than everyone else who'd been out fencing or something, because I'd just be covered in dust because having the rear window is like you say, it's something that comes naturally, isn't it? So
it is, and I think it is a means of escape. So from a safety point of view, we still have to have that opening rear screen. But I think more and more as machines get bigger and implements get bigger and more complex, we have to trust in the technology that's available to us, and with Isobus control now as well, and we're, as we say, looking at variable rate and section control all through one screen. At the end of the day, it's almost becoming like working in an office sat in front of a PC, because you're using the technology to control the machine, control the vehicle more. And you don't have to be outside in the muck and the dust so much. I mean, farming is a unique environment. It's not a job; it's a way of life.
Yeah.
Once it gets in your blood, you never get rid of it. But we've got to try and make sure that we do everything in terms of safety and noise pollution to try and make sure that we look after the people that are working in that environment.
Okay. And then moving away from the cab a little bit, there's also efforts across the industry to reduce actual noise levels from tractors, so the kind of noise pollution. This has come from kind of greater insulation around the engine bay and things like that. How have McCormick adapted their kind of engine bays to reduce overall noise levels?
Well, again, the types of cladding that are being used around the engine, even the way you look at managing the airflow through the engine, even down to the design of the bonnet where you have fins, it can all deflect or even perception of noise.
Mhm.
There's a lot of some great work being done in the States at the moment, looking at how people perceive what noise is as opposed to actual what noise is. I think, there's gone are the old days of you hearing a tractor coming roaring down the road. And you can see the smoke long before you hear it. The engine technology now is so advanced, and what's coming out of the exhaust stack now is 60-70% water vapor with stage 5 engines. You actually hear the noise perhaps of the engine more now than you did before, because we've done so much work around peripheral noise, and that includes how we manage transmissions and how transmissions perform. So again, you go back to some of the very first power shifts, you'd be absolutely revving to the far before you got a power shift change. Now the tractor's managing the transmission, and particularly with CVT and thinking about diesel use and engine wear, the tractor's doing so much for you that the days of taking the stick and whacking the revs out, they're long gone.
Yeah, I mean, that's not just, that's true across the whole operation, isn't it? We're now working at much lower engine speeds, which comes with its efficiency benefits, but as a kind of peripheral thing also reduces this noise level that people may have complained about when you're working a field next to a housing estate or
Absolutely. Well, I remember when I used to live further south than I currently do. You could always tell when it was the middle of harvesting, because you could always hear the balers going, and you'd hear the plunger going in the baler long before you heard the tractor. But it's, at the end of the day, it is a machine. It's doing a job, and much the same way as in the construction industry, they're working hard and very conscious of the environments in which we work. And as an industry, we I think we've got have had a bit of a reputation in the past of being a little bit arrogant to some of our neighbours, but I think a lot of that's changing, and there's a huge amount of work being done to educate the general public as to what actually farming does. And in the past year, I think there's been a greater appreciation than ever of British produced food from a home market, and the quality and the welfare standards that we have for our animals. So I think British agriculture as a business is actually not in a bad place right now.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think that's actually a really nice place to leave it. We kind of talked about all the operator comfort stuff in there, and it's nice to end on a really positive note for British farming, because we are a very forward-thinking industry, and we go far beyond any other sector in terms of technology uptake and efficient working practices. So.
I think the days of the perception of British farming being a little old chap in a cloth cap, trundling along the lane in an open top tractor with a piece of straw hanging out his mouth, it's long gone. We're doing a huge amount of work around gender and equality and women in farming and the perception of what farming brings to the table, and it's actually great fun to be part of this industry. Always has been.
It really is. It really is. I think the next 10 years will bring a lot of changes, and it's going to be a very exciting place to be.
Oh, absolutely. And certainly from our point at McCormick, we've got some big plans for the future.
Any spoilers before I leave then, if you've got some big plans in the future?
Well, in a sort of line of duty moment, no comment.
No comment. Oh, dear. Well, thank you very much, Ben. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks, Matt. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening or watching Machinery Matters. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, you can leave us a 5-star rating. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like or subscribe to our channel. Thanks for listening. Bye.